Ooh, I'm a hungry boy. What do we have? What's that? Lara Croft. Why is this in the fridge? Who locks things in the fridge? It's not 1997 anymore. God. Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Commander Deck Tech. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at Lara Croft Tomb Raider. It is green, blue and a red for a 3/4 legendary creature human ranger. She has First Strike, Reach, and whenever Lara Croft attacks, exile up to one target legendary artifact card or legendary land card from a graveyard and put a discovery counter on it. You may play a card from exile with a discovery counter on it this turn. It also has Raid, which is at the end of combat on your turn. If you attacked this turn, create a treasure token. This is a very cool and a very unique commander, especially in Temur colours. How we're going to be building this is a self-mill deck with a legendary subtheme. The reason for this is that to get the most out of Lara Croft's abilities, we need a whole host of legendary items and locales in our graveyard for her to play. The best way to get a bunch of stuff into our graveyard is to self-mill ourselves. So we will be running a bunch of effects that put cards into our graveyard. Effectively, we're making the tomb for Lara to go raid. We then have all the treasure for her to find. For these, we'll be running a bunch of legendary artifacts. There is a whole host of awesome cards here, and we'll be using them for our card draw, our ramp, our interaction, and also bumping up Lara's stats so we can make her a lethal commander damage threat. So do make sure you keep an eye out for them in every section of the video. Talking of, how these videos work is that we will give you all of the sections, and then a selection of cards for each section that you can choose to make the deck your own. Any card we mention will be down in the description below. First up, we have some self-mill. These are here to put cards into our graveyard, ready for us to bring back with Lara. First up, we have some legendary artifacts. Vivien's Arkbow lets us put something straight into the bin while digging us for some utility creatures in the deck. Matzalantli the Great Door is a great looter that when our bin is nice and full, we can flip it into a land that taps for mana equal to the number of permanents in our graveyard, which I'll be honest, will be a lot. We then have Brass's Tunnel Grinder, which lets us rummage when it comes in, and then a couple of turns later, we'll flip into a repeatable Discover Engine, which will not only put more things into the bin, but also make Lara all the bigger. We also have Palantír of Orthanc. While the mill isn't guaranteed with this one, the worst case is that we scry 2 and draw a card, which will still be really nice. Then you also have Grimoire of the Dead. This is a bit of a slow discard outlet, but it does then let us steal all the creatures in everyone's graveyards and put them into play under our control. So the fact it can be a win condition as well is very nice. It's then also worth mentioning Diligent Excavator and Search for Azcanta. The Excavator will just continually mill us with its triggered ability, and then Search for Azcanta just lets us put a card into our graveyard every turn. Then, if we want later in the game, we can flip it into a land that will dig us 4 cards deep every turn looking for a key spell or bit of interaction. Next up, we have a bunch of really impactful instants and sorceries that not only draw us cards, but also help put a bunch of things into our graveyard as well. There is honestly so many options here. You have cheap ones that do a couple of cards, you have more expensive ones that do a bunch of cards, you have wheels, and you also have ones that make some treasure. I'd honestly really recommend running a decent amount of these, as they will double up as card advantage as well, which will be fantastic. And then you also have cards like Traumatize and Cut Your Losses. These dump half of our library into our graveyard, effectively drawing us like 40 cards, which is not bad for just one spell. Next up, we have some legendary artifacts that we're going to replay from the graveyard with Lara Croft. These ones are here specifically to buff up her ability to attack. First, we have Bow of Nylea. This will give our commander Death Touch, meaning our opponents are less likely to want to block it. But then it also comes with a ton of cool utility. It can add counters to our commander, and it can also protect our graveyard from any hate by putting 4 cards from our graveyard back on the bottom of our library. Next, we have some equipment that we can cast at instant speed. Both Mithril Coat and Embercleave we can cast during our combat phase once we have attacked and exiled one of them with a discovery counter on them. The fact they also attach themselves when they come in, meaning that their basically combat tricks will be awesome, and honestly I think are some of the best cards that we can run. Next, we have Hammer of Nazahn. We will be running some other legendary equipment in this deck, and the fact this lets us cheat on the equip costs of those will honestly be fantastic, while also protecting Lara by giving it indestructible. Talking of other equipment, there's a bunch of really solid options that you can choose from, with cards like Eater of Virtue, Shadowspear, Ace's Baseball Bat, Andúril Narsil Reforged, Blackblade Reforged, and Umezawa's Jitte. These are all awesome and super impactful bits of equipment. If I'm honest, you don't need all of these, but it is nice to have some options to boost up our commander at all different types of budgets. Changing tack a little, we next have the Skullspore Nexus. This will get reduced in cost by our buffed up commander, but then just sits there and then kind of doubles up all of our creatures if they die. But then importantly, it can also double a creature's power for just 2 mana whenever we need it to. Our next slot are ways of getting Lara through in combat unscathed. We have both Bessie and Bilbo's Ring, great at making our commander unblockable so we can reliably swing through with it. Then lastly in this section we have some token makers to give us a bit of a board state. Asika's Chariot can make us a ton of cat tokens to gum up the board, but then Helm of the Host can make us repeated copies of our commander, letting us get back multiple things from our graveyard every turn. Next up we're going to talk about some card draw. Most of this will be tied in with our mill spells, but there's a few other little bits of card advantage that it's worth mentioning. First up, we have Bident of Thassa. This draws us a card whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, and seeing as we want to be attacking every turn, this could be very solid. You then have the Reality Chip and Crown of Gondor. The chip, if it's equipped, becomes a future sight, which is super strong, and then the Crown of Gondor brings the monarchy into the game, for some added card advantage and a bit of chaos. You then have a little Phyrexian Arena with Eye of Vecna. This just draws us a card every turn and is just really solid. Next up is our ramp section, and like with most decks we need the 8 to 10 bits in total to get the deck working. We first have Sword of the Animist and Bitterthorn Nissa's Animus. These are both great bits of equipment that when the equipped creature attacks, lets us go and get a basic land and puts it straight into play. We then have some more treasure makers with the Reaver Cleaver. Again, we're going to be swinging every turn, this will just be great at ramping us ahead. You next have a Mana Rock in the Iron Crag. This can come down on turn 2 and start ramping us, and then later in the game we can turn it into a bit of equipment to buff up our commander's stats. Next we have some Mana Dorks. In this deck specifically I like Delighted Halfling, as it can help cast our commander and have it get around counterspells as well. You then have Deranged Assistant and Millikanen. These also help mill us while also ramping the deck ahead. We then have Gloin Dwarf Emissary. Gimli's dad comes down, then will basically be making us a treasure each turn whenever we cast a historic spell. So as a reminder, that's artifacts, legendaries, or sagas. In a similar vein, you also have Joyra's Familiar, which just makes all of those things, which is a large portion of the deck, cost 1 generic cheaper. Then we also have Phial of Galadriel. At a base level, it's a manolith, but if we're ever out of cards, which could quite easily happen with all the discard that we're running, this draws us back 2 cards every time, which will just be super nice. And then lastly, you can top up your ramp section with some rampant growth effects, cards that go and get basic lands out of the deck. In this build, I personally like ones that sack a land and go and get 2 out of the deck, as if we sack a legendary land, we can just replay it later with Lara, but obviously there's plenty more standard options out there that you can run. Next up is our interaction section, and with this we want to start at 8 bits and then go up from there the more spiky that our playgroup is. Firstly, we have Anger of the Gods, a great board wipe for taking out any small annoying creatures, while importantly not touching our commander. Next up, we have a bunch of really good answers in Temur, with cards like Reality Shift, Resculpt, Beast Within, and Chaos Warp. They're just really good, they're instant speed, I can't recommend them enough. We then have some more board wipes we can get back from our graveyard in the form of The Moment and Karn Silex. It'll just be really nice to have access to these on top of everything else that the deck is doing. We then also have some more budget board wipes in these colours with things like Azuri's Predation and Blasphemous Act. They're just good, they're solid, they're cheap, run them if you need them. Next up is a little bit of protection. We have touched on some of these bits in earlier sections, but these are just nice additional bits to help keep Lara around. First up we have Hajar Loyal Bodyguard. A 2-mana 3/3 is just fine, and then the fact that we can sack it to give Lara a boost, and more importantly make it indestructible for a turn, will just be awesome. You then also have K9 Mark 1. The extra ward cost will be really helpful at keeping Lara around, then also the added ability to make it unblockable will be fantastic. In a similar vein, we also have Dolam Gate, a really great card that, although isn't legendary, will prevent all damage Lara will take in combat, meaning she can swing in no matter how big our opponent's blockers are. Okay, we have the base of the deck, let's go over some dedicated ways of winning the game. First up, we have Displaced Dinosaurs. I think this card is really stupid and really funny. All historic permanents we play, from the artifacts to the legendary lands to the treasure we make off Lara, they're all now 7/7 dinosaurs. Honestly, that is insane and super scary. If we land this, we're honestly winning extremely quickly. We next have Goblin Welder. I really like this card in this deck. As Lara makes treasure, with the Goblin Welder, we can then swap one of those treasures for any artifact in our graveyard with the Welder, letting us cheat anything we want straight into play. We then also have Chisaro the Shattered Blade. This basically makes us a nice token board state very easily, and then also will buff up any equipped creatures that we have. And then we have Kedis the Emberclaw Familiar. Because we are sort of a Voltron deck, this will make it so that any combat damage that Lara Croft deals is thrown around to all of our opponents at the same time. And then because more attacking is more attacking, you have some ways of getting some extra combat steps. There's a couple of options out there, but personally in this deck I really like Zariel, Archduke of Avernus, Hexplate Wallbreaker, and Morag, Fury of Akum. These are just going to be really good, especially because Lara's ability heavily revolves around attacking. The more combat steps we have just means we'll get more value out of it. And then lastly, we have some cards that reward us for casting spells from exile. Because importantly, that's what happens when we cast cards with Lara with discovery counters on them. Faldorn, Dreadwolf, Herald will make us wolves and treasure tokens, and then the Passionate Archaeologist background, which I'll be honest seems quite apt, will deal a bunch of damage to an opponent whenever we cast one of those spells. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, this is actually going to be a pretty big section, so we can also play legendary lands from our graveyards with Lara as well. First up is Academy Ruins. It's just some nice bonus recursion for our artifacts, and the fact it'll also let us get back any non-legendary artifacts as well will just be great. Next we have Horde of the Bandit Lord and Untucky the Cloudkeeper. The Hall gives Lara haste, and the Cloudkeeper is basically a Legends-only version of Ancient Tomb. We then have some more legendary lands from Kamigawa Old and New that we can run. In this deck, outside of budget, there's no reason not to run all of these. They all have bonus effects and don't come into play tapped. The fact that with Lara we can always put them into play from our graveyard guarantees that we'll be hitting our land drops every turn. Right, thank you all very much for watching. Do make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff really helps the channel grow. And do let me know down in the comments, what is your favourite legendary artifact from the ones we've gone through today? Are there any that I've missed? I would be really interested to know. But until next time, I will see you all soon. Goodbye.